I'm telling you, we're lost.
And I'm telling you, I know where I'm going.
Give me that.
Hey!
You had it upside down for Pete's sake. Look, all I know is that we're out in the woods, specifically in my neck of the woods, and that there's a family reunion out here that I've been dying to go to.
Are all of you named Gregor, or is that just a last name?
For the last time, it's Gregor Reindeer, not the other way around. And don't even think about getting my middle name wrong.
Alright, dearie, don't get your antlers in a twist. Oh, hey, is that it?
That is literally the creepiest looking building I've ever seen.
Oh, it's got your name on it, so it must be.
But that's not my...
Oh, I'm sure it'll be fine.
If you say so.
Would you like a room?
Gregory Horror Show is a 1999 CGI anime produced by Naomi Iwata of Milky Cartoon. Milky Cartoon is actually one of the oldest CGI studios in Japan, with this series being one of its more well-known properties. Gregory Horror Show is about a super creepy hotel in the middle of what I can assume is purgatory, and then people go there for various reasons.
This series is very bizarre, but it's a lot of fun if you're the artsy type that likes to interpret the meanings behind all the little stuff. It's an odd mix of psychological horror, dark comedy, and thought-provoking truths. The first 2 volumes follow the protagonist in first person, and as the series goes on, you learn more about who they are and what they've been suffering through. The 3rd volume follows Gregory in 3rd person as he travels on a train filled with his own memories. And the 4th half season is more comedy-based and just kind of departs from what the rest of the show was about. So it's not really all that important and we can just ignore it. For this review, we'll just be focusing on the first 3 volumes.
I've only heard about it because of the Gregory Horror Show video game, but that's for another time.
That game is super expensive, by the way. Good luck if you ever wanted to play it.
That's what emulators are for.
I heard about the show when a reviewer I watch, The Mysterious Mr. Enter, did a review of it, and I wasn't disappointed.
Neither was I. Despite the CGI looking like it was made in the late 90s, obviously, it has enough charm and style to it that I can forgive a slightly dated look. Doesn't stop me from watching shows like Reboot anyway. While the camera work can look a bit odd as it switches from first person to more of a third person fly on the wall angle, it's still pretty effective.
I'm kinda on the fence about how I feel about the camera work in the first 2 volumes. There is some information that the audience needs to know that would not be an earshot of the protagonist. However, whenever you do the first-person perspective in a show like this, it's because you want the viewer to place themselves inside the story. Whenever they switch between the 2 perspectives, it breaks the first-person immersion. However, it's a very small gripe, and it doesn't ruin it for me.
The characters are all designed pretty well, too, even if they're not all furries. You have Gregory and his mama, who are not related to me at all, as they're both rats and not, hooved in any way, shape, or form.
Who would want to be related to a rat anyways?
Rude. You have a rather sexually confusing lizard nurse named Catherine, who gets, very excited when she uses her big needle on her patients.
Very dull, and I'm going to pierce it into your red, juicy vein. Yes, now it's time for you to give me your blood. Don't worry, I promise it won't hurt a bit.
Let's not dwell too much on that. You also have the very weeaboo-sounding Neko Zombie, a fortune teller frog, angel/devil dog, depending on her mood, and a whole bunch of other characters that are, again, anthropomorphic but not exactly furry. Like Judgment Boy.
Do you know who I am? They call me Judgment Boy.
He's an anthropomorphic scale that trolls people into making life-changing choices and then judges them. The hotel that everyone resides in is super creepy as well, fittingly since this is a horror show. See what I did there?
Trust me, the show wouldn't be as good if Gregor was telling the jokes instead of Gregory.
Hey, I didn't come up with it, Milky Cartoon did.
While there are individual themes within each volume, the main overarching theme seems to be fantasy versus reality, the acceptance of your own fate, and cycles. However, the fun of the series comes from finding this stuff out for yourself. So I highly recommend all of you to go watch it before getting too deep into this review, as we will be spoiling some stuff. Each episode is only like 2.5 minutes, so watching one volume will only take an hour. So go ahead and gather some of your friends, or plushies if you don't have any friends.
We won't judge.
And have yourself a little scary movie marathon. The series is pretty easy to find online anyways. So yeah, spoilers from this point on.
Now, Volume 1 involves a male protagonist who is your stereotypical wage slave with a wife and kid. Life's gotten stale for this guy apparently, and from what I can guess, he's having some sort of midlife crisis. So he goes down to Gregory's, as you do.
Though, to be fair, it's more like he gets lost and finds his way here.
He runs around and gets scared by a bunch of things, including his own moral judgment. But then, with the help of the Swedish Grim Reaper, he returns to reality again. Unfortunately, reality turns out to be pretty gray, literally, and the protagonist decides to return to fantasy once more. And then he turns into a gyroid. You know, Animal Crossing.
The main theme of this volume seems to be the difficulty of decision making. The biggest one being between the boredom of reality and the horror of his fantasy. Throughout the volume, you can see the protagonist having to make decisions with Judgment Boy, the constant heaven or hell written in many places, and the fear of what comes with each choice, as the protagonist constantly doubts himself. This dynamic reminds me of a quote by Arthur Schopenhauer. He argued that life swings like a pendulum backward and forward between pain and boredom. Pain in this case being the fear. This seems to be the main struggle our protagonist is facing here.
There is an episode where Gregory himself is compared to the protagonist as well, to the point of outright saying that they're the same person. This kinda makes sense the more you watch the series, especially Volume 3, but I guess we'll have to talk about that later. Volume 2 is about a woman going through a rather sticky situation. See, she went to Gregory's because her best friend married her ex-boyfriend, the boyfriend she broke up with prior because of her only focusing on her career. She currently has no relationship and is jealous of the marriage. Furthermore, she's worried that she'll never find love again. It's bad enough that apparently it was echoing out during the reception, though maybe that was just a spooky metaphor scene. A little hard to tell in this series.
I will say the ending of the series was way more chilling than the first one. Way creepier and stuck with me more than anything else in the show. It's kind of interesting to see how this woman decides to accept her fate in the end rather than to sever the bond, unlike the male protagonist who escaped. In the first volume, Gregory and the protagonist were in a yin-yang relationship, with the protagonist being the sane and with the rat Gregory being his dark side. However, by the end of Volume 2, the protagonist becomes a rat herself, and by extension, part of the family. You can either fight the darkness within you, or accept it and let it take over.
Wow, this series is getting deep.
While I like this volume as much as the first one, I will say there's one thing that really hurts this volume as a whole. James. Gregory's annoying, obnoxious, bratty grandson. They use this kid way too much, and he's stupid and I hate him.
I have to agree. I'm not sure why people keep making these maniacal kids that act spoiled and constantly ruin things for other people, but they suck and they should be reserved for villain characters and not much else.
Well, now that I think about it, in the first volume, Judgment Boy was used a lot because the protagonist had problems with decision making. So, do you think maybe James was serving the same purpose? She was looking for marriage, and that does tend to lead to kids.
Depends on the couple, but you know, keep going.
And in the episode with the bonsai guy, we see the protagonist marrying Gregory, who has replaced her lover. Maybe the fantasy is telling her that what she wants is not as good as what she thinks it's going to be.
And then in Volume 3, we hop aboard a train traveling around this fantasy realm with Gregory as the main POV. However, it's pulled out of first person and strictly into third person. I'm not sure why, but it's probably because we already know what Gregory looks like, or because it's not a human we're following around. At first, it seems like one long prequel to the whole series, complete with a weird time warp scene where an alternate version of himself hands him the keys to Gregory House. But then the train just jumps right off the tracks from there, and we realize that the train is just Gregory's escape from the house. You remember the protagonist from Volume 1 and how he was basically yin and yang with the rat? See, now it seems like they're both having trouble facing their responsibilities.
This volume is quite the departure from the first two, and the first time I watched it, I was completely lost. Gregory's encounters on the train are his own memories about how he met his hotel guests. The only characters that aren't memories are James, Death, and Neko Zombie. Their purpose is to wake Gregory up from his fantasy and to remind him of his job. Like the first volume, the theme of repetition is shown at the end. Gregory realizes that these memories are just going to play over and over again for eternity, and that's what brings him out of it. However, at the end of the last episode, we see Gregory enter the train again, only to repeat what the protagonist fell into before.
So, this is an entertaining series, if a bit artsy, but how furry is it? Let's take it through the chance system.
Oh boy, that sounds fancy.
If you didn't know, chance is my new handy rubric to see how furry something is. It stands for cast, harmony, anthropocentrism, narrative, commonality, and expression. Let's go ahead and start with cast. Now, we have a whole wide variety of anthropomorphic characters, but sometimes they're a cactus, or a clock, an aging record player, you get the idea. For the most part, the characters most important to the narrative are mainly animals, like Gregory and his mother. Since we have an anthro majority, I'll give this a 3 out of 4. Now let's go to harmony. Since this is one big cluster of monsters and other weird crap, I would say that all the furry ones reside pretty harmoniously with the non-furries, even if it's all purgatorial fantasy. I'll give it a perfect 4. For anthropocentrism, I'd say that these characters are all pretty much anthro with a few animal behaviors here and there.
I would say that making Gregory a rat was a good way to show how ugly his dark desires are.
Right, these characters are made with thematics in mind and not so much just making animal characters. Their chosen species or object they're based on points to their personality or how they fit within this twisted little story. Their animal traits are minimal, but still give a charm to each of these characters. I consider that a 3 out of 4. On to narrative, this series is more about the protagonist's dilemma than trying to put together a story about a spooky furry character, save for volumes 3 and 4. As I said, these furry species play thematic significance to the story, but it's not entirely animal-based. It's more, how would you say, horror-based? Metaphor-based? I don't know. The series is focused on being creepy and artsy. So furries, being furries, isn't that important to the overall plot, which only gives this a 2 out of 4. With commonality, the only human characters we technically have are Businessman, protagonist in the first volume, and then the woman from volume 2. Even Catherine pretty much confirms that she hasn't drawn blood from a human in a long time. So majority furries and anthropomorphic objects, which will rank in as a 3 out of 4 for me. And finally, we have expression. Considering this is anime and 1999 quality CGI at that, I didn't expect these beings to be completely anatomically accurate to what they're based on. They pretty much have all tall trapezoids for bodies, and their heads are either cube-shaped or some other stylistically polygonal shape. I consider it more humanoid than animalistic, but with stylistic enough design to make their animal aspects distinct. This gets a 2 out of 4. All in all, we have a furriness score of 17. Distinctly furry in several aspects, but not a complete animal house. Not too bad.
As far as entertainment goes, I give it 4 soul-crushing existential crises out of 5.
If you would like to watch this series, go ahead and pull it up on YouTube, or go ahead and find a copy of the DVD, I guess. It's kind of hard for me to find. I think I found it in like a used video store. And yes, they do still have those around, trust me. They just kind of merge with video game stores. But anyway, this has been Gregor Spooky Scary Reindeer.
And Autumn, I don't have a middle name, Heart.
With How Furry Is It? Check out Autumn's channel for art and more general critique. But since you're already here, stick around for more anthro analysis and antler antics.
Bye-bye.
Oh!